this my clicker? Yes, okay. Hi everyone, I am Ann Owens. I'm a sociologist at the University of Southern California. Really happy to be here with you today. I'm honored that doing a postdoc at Stanford sort of got me a sort of backdoor ticket into the SIPA community. So there's that scene from Mean Girls where they're like, she didn't even go here, but that's me. So thanks, though, don't tell. I have my, look, I'm an alum. Okay, so maybe a familiar figure to some of us on the left. So there's been some recent scholarly attention to growing income achievement gaps. So this is a figure from Sean Reardon's chapter in Wither Opportunity, showing that the income achievement gap has sort of grown over the past 40 years. It's sort of higher now, I'm going to give up on that, than the racial achievement gap with the dotted lines. And then on the right, we have Bailey and Dynarski's chapter from that same volume showing that college graduation rates between high and low income children, or I guess young adults, those disparities have also increased. So overall, we have sort of this evidence that the income gap in educational success has emerged as sort of a pressing source of inequality. And my own research over the past few years has looked at income segregation, and income segregation has risen between neighborhoods among families with kids, between schools, and between school districts. So just to snapshot one such paper with Sean Reardon and Sandy Jenks in 2016, we find that income segregation between school districts in large metropolitan areas increased by over 15% from 1990 to 2010. So in this paper, I kind of set out to see whether these two things were moving together. Does income segregation between school districts contribute to the income achievement gap? And why might we think these things go together? So past research shows us that family income matters for educational success. High-income parents may be better able to buy things that sort of matter for their children's success and achievement. And one thing that higher income parents can buy is residence in higher cost neighborhoods, which might provide access to higher quality schools. In this paper, I'm focusing on school districts, segregation between school districts, not between schools and neighborhoods, which are also very important contexts. But the idea is that when metropolitan areas are highly segregated by income between school districts, you end up with some very advantaged districts and some very disadvantaged districts. In really segregated places, students from high-income families attend school in affluent, highly resourced districts in terms of the financial resources and school funding, and also the social resources in terms of who they're going to school with, who those kids' parents are, parent involvement, all of those things as well. So segregation may actually provide a boost to high-income kids. They get to go to these really affluent districts that segregation creates. And then on the flip side, low-income families in really segregated places end up in more disadvantaged contexts than they would in more integrated places. So the idea here is that segregation may have trade-offs, right? It may be beneficial for those who can access the really sort of resourced places that it creates. And it may be detrimental for those who cannot access those places. So I'm guilty in my own work of often documenting racial and income inequalities separately, even though we know that they're very much intertwined. So when I was developing this project, I was trying to think about the implications of income segregation for racial inequality as well as economic inequality. And income segregation may also contribute to the racial achievement gap. Because of the link between race and income in the US, racial segregation means that Black students attend schools with poverty rates that are twice as high as schools of white students. In addition, sociologists and other researchers, including some of the people here in this room, have shown that Black high-income families live in lower-income neighborhoods than white families with very similar incomes. So Black middle-class neighborhoods tend to be surrounded by low-income neighborhoods, which is not true for white middle and upper-class neighborhoods. So income segregation may contribute to Black families being sort of shut out of these high-resource school districts, contributing to the racial achievement gap. So the two empirical questions that I set out to answer in the paper were to understand if the is the income achievement gap larger in metropolitan areas with higher levels of income segregation between school districts, and then paralleling that, is the racial achievement gap also larger in these segregated contexts? Okay, so to answer these questions, I need data on children's test scores. I need to know their family income, their race, and the level of income segregation in the metro area where they live. And so the panel study of income dynamics, Child Development Supplement, is one source for these data. So my outcome variables are achievement test scores from the PSID. They do this Child Development Supplement a few times. The new one was just in 2014. Those data are just out in the last year. But when I was writing this paper, they weren't out yet. So I used the CDS in 2002, which is a sample of 5 to 17-year-old children of the larger PSID sample families. I used the Woodcock-Johnson standardized assessments of cognitive skills. Today I'll talk about math. I can talk more about reading at another time. Family income is measured annually in the PSID, so I have sort of the average family income from when a kid was born to when they took the test, these standardized tests, and so I just take an average of that. And then via a restricted use license, I know where the kid lives, and so I can link that to their metropolitan area, and I estimate income segregation between school districts within metro areas, drawing on counts of families with children enrolled in public schools in 16 family income categories from the school district demographic system in 2000. So I use the rank order information theory index H, which ranges from 0 to 1. I'll just say that when H is 0, it implies sort of no segregation. Every district has the same income distribution as the metro. When H is 1, it sort of indicates total segregation. So every household in each school district has the same income. There's no integration. If you'd like to learn more about income segregation, I hear there's going to be a really good poster at the poster session presented by Joe Townsend. And you should all go ask Joe the hard questions and just let me say whatever I want. Okay, so the PSID also provides information about students' race. So in the income achievement gap analyses, I include all the students. And then when I look at the racial achievement gap, I limit the sample to non-Hispanic, Black, and white students just for sample size reasons. I control for student and family traits that might confound the relationship between income and test scores. One key control variable here is that I have a test score, a test that the students took 5 years prior. In 1997, so my analyses sort of capture growth in math achievement, which we might think was sort of better linked to contextual effects because we know kids start school with different skills. Control for other sort of student controls, have some metropolitan area controls as well that might confound income segregation and test scores as well. So I end up with 1,202 students and 170 MSAs, a small amount of missing data that I deal with multiple imputation. So then to explore this relationship between income segregation and the income achievement gap, I'm predicting individual test scores. Here I'll talk about math for student I and MSAJ using a multi-level model. So this individual level equation, the key predictor there is sort of that cumulative measure of family income. And then I allow that slope of family income to vary based on characteristics of the metro area. And the key variable there, the key predictor there, is this level of income segregation between districts in the metro. And so I end up sort of presenting these as interaction terms. I'll show you some figures for that. But I expect this sort of interaction term to be positive. So income segregation will amplify the positive association between income and test scores, either providing a boost for high-income family or for high-income students, or a disadvantage for low-income students, or both, sort of widening this income achievement gap when income segregation is higher. And then I repeat these analyses by interacting race rather than family income with income segregation. Okay, so this figure shows the marginal effects of family income on math achievement. So it's illustrating the interaction term, basically. So the y-axis is showing you sort of percentiles of income segregation in the kids' metros. And then the y-axis is showing the coefficient on income. I don't know if you can see sort of a confidence interval in gray as well. So there's a reference line here at 0. And so basically where the confidence interval overlaps that reference line, there's sort of no systematic relationship between income and kids' math scores. And then where the line departs from 0, income matters. And so the positive slope indicates that as income segregation increases, the association between family income and kids' math scores is larger. And this is from the model with full controls. But it basically shows us that there's a larger income achievement gap in more segregated places. In integrated places, income doesn't really do all that much. So the marginal effects plot shows us that family income contributes to children's math achievement when income segregation is higher. And then this figure helps us interpret that positive slope. So as I mentioned, it could be sort of this trade-off story. It could be that the income achievement gap grows because high-income kids get a boost from segregation and or low-income kids sort of fall behind in more segregated places. So here I sort of reclassified family income as based on the national income distribution and just assigned everyone to quintiles. And I interacted those quintiles, rather than the continuous income measure, with income segregation. And again, we have income segregation across the x-axis, math scores on the y-axis. And the sort of striking pattern here is that the highest income kids, so this is sort of top quintile kids, their test scores rise as income segregation increases, right? So the gap, and this is sort of non-significant down here, so that's why it's sort of lower. But this indicates that the income achievement gap is larger in more segregated places, largely because high-income kids benefit from income segregation. They attend very affluent school districts in these places. And then we really don't see much action kind of in the middle. This is another way to show that. This is just sort of top income quintile versus pooled everybody else. This tests sort of poverty. I'll skip that because the action really is with high-income kids. But then I wanted to kind of dig into this finding a little bit because it wasn't necessarily what I expected. So I next just really descriptively took, so I was using the PSID data. I went back to the school district demographic system data, which tells me about who lives in every district, in the U.S. for all families, essentially, because it draws on census in America, or I guess in this case, 2000 census data. And so I just wanted to say, okay, what does the average district of a high and low income kid look like? And how does that change depending on whether they live in an integrated or a segregated metro area? So I did sort of exposure measures and basically used a district's median income as like a super rough proxy for kind of what it looks like in terms of financial and social resources. And then I wanted to see, as I said, whether the inequalities in the districts of high and low income families were larger in more segregated places. So basically, these 4 sets of bars show you what low and high income families' districts look like in MSAs by their quartile of income segregation. So the high income families, their sort of average district median income is on the dark bars, and then the low income families are on the lighter bars. And so in every sort of quartile of segregation, high-income families live in higher-income districts than low-income families. Okay, that's not really that interesting. But then you can see this gap sort of grows. And so in the most segregated places, the sort of median income of high and low-income families' districts, there's like a $25,000, $22,000 difference there. And this gap grows primarily because these black bars keep getting taller. The white bars, don't really change that much. So it's pretty consistent with the finding that the action is basically what's happening with the high-income families, because income segregation is basically creating these really sort of affluent districts that high-income families can take advantage of. So the answer to the first research question is basically that yes, the income achievement gap is larger in places that have greater income segregation between districts. So quickly flipping over to the race story, I moved to predicting the racial achievement gap. Again, I'm just comparing non-Hispanic black students and non-Hispanic white students. Marginal effects plots confirm a positive interaction between child race and income segregation. And this is sort of a parallel figure where the action is basically because as income segregation in the sample increases, white kids' scores are going up. White kids are getting a boost. So then I decided to complicate my life and redo that figure, but this time also split it out by race, right? So this time I want to know, okay, what is the average high and low income, so what sort of district does the average high and low income white and black student live in? And I classified, again, high and low income based on the top and bottom quintile of the national income distribution. I also ran it within race in terms of race-specific income distribution. It comes out basically the same. But here we've got 4 sets. So again, we've got sort of clusters of bars by income segregation quartiles. And then the left 2 bars are for black families in each figure or in each sort of set. The 2 right bars are for white families. And we sort of compare high and low income families. And so in the least segregated MSAs, in the least segregated metros, both high-income black families and high-income white families live in higher income districts than their low-income counterparts. And these gaps are pretty much the same. It's about $4,000 to $5,000 in each place. But then over here in the most segregated MSAs, we see that white high-income families, again, sort of live in these really affluent districts, much higher income districts than low-income white families. This is like a $19,000 gap. And the high-low income gap among black families is only about half that much. And further, high-income black families, so black families with incomes in the top national income quintile, live in basically the same types of districts as the poorest white families in the US. So that was my favorite finding for like a half day, not because it's interesting and terrible, not because it's something I wanted to see. So basically, as income segregation rises, white high-income families access increasingly affluent districts, while equally high-income black families are sort of shut out of these affluent places. So again, it kind of makes sense that income segregation is contributing to the racial achievement gap because it's providing whites with advantages over even similarly high-income black families. Okay, so I guess the main empirical findings of the paper are that we do see this association between both income and racial achievement gaps and income segregation between school districts. And again, I think my results indicate that income segregation basically sort of helps high-income students and white students pull away by creating very affluent contexts that may have extra resources curricularly or in terms of the peers that they're going to school with. I think more research can be done to understand those mechanisms. Broadly, the results emphasize the trade-offs of segregation, its advantages for high-income families who can sort of hoard resources, and the disadvantages for low-income families who can't access these places. I should also say that while the scores of disadvantaged students, either low-income or African-American, seem to change little across segregation levels, they're still at a disadvantage, right? The high scores of the more advantaged students in those places show what achievement sort of could be, and these students are not able to achieve at that level. I think the paper sort of speaks to the age-old policy debate about, how can we create advantageous contexts for all? Is integration necessary? Can we sort of buy our way out of things? I think that there's interesting lessons to think about there, and thinking about how do you get political buy-in and the different trade-offs of segregation. And then finally, I think some of my future research and other papers I've written also looks at segregation at different scales. So it could be the case that if you dig in and look at segregation within districts, between schools or between neighborhoods, you might see different patterns. Maybe that is a place where you really see low-income student scores suffering and not this sort of high-income students pulling away. So I think I will end there. Thanks.